Congratulations, co-chairs, for this meeting today, a testament to the urgency of addressing the burning issues related to the reform of the United Nations Security Council in a comprehensive and holistic fashion. And I also align with the statements delivered by the G4 and the L69 this morning and wish to make the following additional remarks in my national capacity. Before I do so, India too gratefully acknowledges the initiatives taken by the co-chairs with regard to webcasting and the opening of a website repository in the last IGN cycle, and we reiterate our appreciation for these incremental efforts of the co-chairs. However, we continue to believe that the need to take credible steps to instill new life in the discussions on the reform of the Security Council, as reflected in the commitment made by our leaders in the UN 75 declaration, remains unfulfilled. Again, co-chairs, we will do well to recall that this past September, during the high-level week, the UNGA heard unequivocal calls for comprehensive and meaningful reforms from more than 85 world leaders. These calls must be answered. We must all realize that the clock is ticking, and turning the other way in the face of global challenges is just not an option. I have said this before, co-chairs, and I will say so again: multilateral institutions rarely die. They simply fade into irrelevance. And here I will take the opportunity to highlight that this year, upon India's initiative, the African Union became a permanent member of the G20 at the New Delhi summit in September, thus ensuring that an important and valuable voice from the Global South is added to an influential institution of global governance and decision-making. It was India's firm conviction that with Africa's full participation in the G20, this group would truly be a more representative and relevant institution. Now, this significant step in reform should inspire the United Nations, a much older organization, to also make the Security Council contemporary. Broad representation is, after all, a prerequisite for both effectiveness and credibility. The summit of the future next year, therefore, provides a golden opportunity, and if I may be allowed to use this cliche, a golden opportunity to reaffirm our common commitment to the UN Charter and undertake a review of the Charter focused on reforms in general, including Security Council reform. And co-chairs, we will do well to recall that the UN General Assembly, through its decision 62/557 of 2008, is explicit in 4 areas: in the need for this reform process to be member state driven, based on member states' proposals, done in good faith, and with mutual respect. To this end, we emphasize that the early commencement of text-based negotiations remains the very essence of the spirit of Decision 62/557. A text prepared on the basis of member states' proposals is part of a member state-driven process, while the subsequent negotiation and agreement by member states makes it member state-owned. We believe that the co-chairs' elements paper provides some indication, however imperfect in its content and form, of where we stand collectively, how we approach the 5 aspects of council reform and the elements of convergence and divergence. The elements paper and the framework document, along with the rollover decision, provides continuity to our work. In this context, we note the transmission of the revised co-chairs elements paper during the last cycle. Going forward, we need to be cognizant of the fact that the IGN process is a democratic process, and it is our collective responsibility to ensure that the elements paper accurately reflects its deliberations. The IGN process does not, should not, work on presumed discretionary powers, and I'm sure our co-chairs will agree with me on this. Towards this end, we hope that the co-chairs will consider the views of the membership in the interest of the IGN process. Thus, it is our minimal expectation our minimal expectation that the elements paper accurately reflects the areas of divergences and convergences. For example, it was clear from the interventions in recent discussions and debates in the IGN, the UNGA, and the Security Council that a large majority of the member states supported expansion of both the permanent and the non-permanent categories. To say anything beyond this and present it under divergence is just simply inaccurate. This is clearly supported by the majority of member states, and this fact is on record. In the 2015 framework document on the issue of categories of membership, a total of 113 member states out of 122 who submitted their positions in the framework document supported expansion in both of the existing categories specified in the Charter. This means that more than 90% of the written submissions in the document are in favor of expansion in both categories of membership specified in the Charter. This is a proof of support, and showing it as a divergence defeats the mandate of the majority in favor of a few. Further, the way the second and third points in the divergence section of regional representation is phrased seems to only raise questions which are completely out of place and are only likely to create confusion about this process. While some countries can continue to discuss issues in theory, but for issues to be reflected in a document like the elements paper, this should be respectful of national and regional positions. And these points did neither. Further, we seek clarification from the co-chairs on the basis on which the position about who opposes attribution has been framed. These are serious issues being reflected inaccurately, and this does need correction in the elements paper. Co-chairs, we all acknowledge the fact that the present structure of the Security Council is not reflective of contemporary realities and that there is an urgent need to reform this. Expanding only in the non-permanent category will not solve the problem. It will, in fact, not reform one category of the Council at all. And, in fact, it will widen the difference between permanent and non-permanent members even more, further entrenching a dispensation that is no longer relevant in the current geopolitical context. Now, turning to technicalities. On the elements paper and discussion on other clusters, my delegation has the following additional comments to offer. One, the structure of the elements paper needs to be streamlined further by doing away with the lengthy introduction and the distinction between convergences and divergences. Two, exact attributions to be introduced throughout the document for each position and for eliminating vague terms like some members or other members, and thus explicitly naming the member countries. Three, the language on the common African position should be further strengthened and be included in full under general convergences with a reference to both the Esselvini Consensus and the CERT Declaration as desired by the African group. Four, there needs to be a clear attribution of groups and member states that have openly expressed their full support for the common African position so as to differentiate between those who are in favor of expansion of the permanent category to include permanent representation for African nations as envisioned by the common African position and in response to the historical injustice meted to Africa, and those who do not support permanent seats for Africa and try to dilute their claim by inventing new categories like regional permanent seats. And five, the concerns presented by us and many other delegations on procedural issues and working methods, including calls for a single consolidated document classified as divergence, presently needs clear attribution to indicate the high level of support on these issues. We also look forward to a discussion, co-chairs, on muddles in the coming days, for which the L69 has already offered its vision document into the repository. Finally, co-chairs, as we make greater efforts to bridge divergences and find convergences since 2009, stepping into the 15th year of the intergovernmental negotiations, my delegation is firmly of the view that we cannot have old wine in new bottles and expect new results, which is comprehensive reforms. Conversations on convergence and divergence alone can only lead us so far. As diplomats, we know that countries do not change positions unless in a negotiating mode where we create possibilities of real and meaningful exchanges. Going forward, what we should do is what we are good at doing. As the name of the process itself suggests, negotiations with attributions. Else, our collective failure to make concrete progress on the issue of Security Council reform at this critical juncture will be interpreted as an attempt towards the preservation of the failed status quo, the brunt of which is borne by real people around the world who are grappling with real threats, both existing and emerging. In this scenario, we do not see how an IGN, which cannot even prepare an accurate reflection of its discussions, can produce a credible input for the summit of the future. Let me remind all of you that the summit of the future, unlike the intergovernmental negotiations, is actually an intergovernmental negotiating process. We need to get real. India, as the world's largest democracy, will continue to strive for the voice of the Global South to be heard on the urgency of immediate action in this regard. Thank you very much.